All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's workshop on leveraging your doctoral experiences for student services roles. My name is Allison Howard, and I'm an associate director on the graduate student and postdoctoral fellow team at Penn Career Services. So this is the final installment in our Career Insights series on careers in higher ed. We've had a lot of great conversations already this week. Monday, we hosted a Q&A session with a representative from Human Resources here at Penn, talking about the hiring process from the recruiter's perspective. A recording of that is actually available on the Career Services YouTube channel, so I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat. And then yesterday, we had the opportunity to talk to 3 graduate alumni working in higher ed at 3 different universities, just to see what this profession looks like outside of Penn. But today is the pièce de résistance, a workshop whose goal is to provide some really concrete, actionable advice on where to look for jobs in higher ed, how to parse job ads to understand what various schools and offices' priorities are, and how to describe your doctoral experiences, so your research, teaching, and service, in ways that will feel relevant and compelling to hiring managers in this field. So we have 2 very distinguished facilitators with us today. Carolyn Ureña is the Director of Academic Advising for the College of Arts and Sciences here at Penn. She holds a PhD in Comparative Literature. And then we have Ian Petrie, who is the Director of Graduate Student Programming and Pedagogy at CETLI, the Center for Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Innovation. And he holds a PhD in South Asian History. So thank you so much to both of you for being here and for supporting Penn graduate students. I know that higher ed is a very popular career path for PhDs. But despite all of the ways in which it can overlap with academia in terms of the kind of faculty and research side, there are obviously important distinctions as well between faculty roles and roles in higher ed administration that students sometimes don't always fully understand. So hopefully we can dig into some of those distinctions today. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Carolyn.
Thanks so much, Allison. I'm so excited to be here. I love talking to graduate students who are thinking about the different ways that they can put their degree to work, and to talk about how I managed to end up where I am. So I'm going to share my screen. I have some slides where I'll talk about my journey a little bit. I'll talk about how to reframe your experiences, especially when we're thinking about how in graduate school we're often taught to write a CV, which is like the whole long history of all the awesome things I've done in an academic setting, and then turn it into a resume. So I just have a couple of sort of side-by-sides of how I've done it. And then there are 2 job ads that Allison had helped me find that I will try to I'll put it on the screen, read a little bit of it with you, and kind of point out the places that I would suggest emphasizing, not only in my own sort of experience translating my skills from graduate student, person with a doctorate, to someone who's a staff person and administrator, but also as a hiring manager. So the things that I'm looking for when we write a job ad, what we're aspiring for, what we're more realistically imagining we'll get from the job pool, and also what I'm looking at when I'm very quickly reading a cover letter, because that's just real. We have day jobs, and then we're also hiring for a position that is open, if it, theoretically, not right now in our shoes, as you know, but we are working our job. We're doing the job of the person that we're trying to fill, and then we're also reading your material. So that's why it's so important to be clear and succinct, so that we then want to talk to you, and that will be the place where you can really expand. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to probably ask to make sure that I shared it correctly. So let's see. So I have this, but I want to make it slightly bigger. Okay, do you still see my slides? Yes, thank you, Ian. Okay, so a little bit about me, because that's something that I think is always super important, is to remember that we're whole people, and especially as the Director of Academic Advising in the college, our holistic advising practice is, in fact, to see our students as whole people, part of communities, part of families, and the things that are important to you in your whole life will influence your job search. So I just wanted to tell you about myself. So I'm a first-generation low-income graduate of Princeton University. I'm the daughter of Dominican immigrants. I'm a Latina, decolonial scholar, Fanonian. I'm a spouse, I'm a mother. All of that influenced how I approached my job search. And even when I was in graduate school, realizing through the process of being in grad school that I didn't want to be a professor. That's not something I wanted to do. I wanted to be in universities, but I didn't necessarily want to go on the tenure track. I have a PhD in comparative literature from Rutgers University. After that experience, which was fantastic, that's where I wrote my dissertation on Frantz Fanon, on his political writings and how his medical practice influenced his political writings. I then went to Princeton, where I worked in the writing program from 2017 to 2020. And that was a job that I chose strategically because I knew that it was a term position. So my husband was in medical school doing his MD, PhD. I knew that he was then going to go through the match process to become an intern, actually here at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So I was embracing, in fact, my sort of the way that my personal life was intersecting with my career. So I chose to apply for things that I knew would be shorter term, but that would still set me up to still be in contact with students, still teach, and build those skills. While I was at Princeton, I taught in the writing program, but I also did academic advising because I love working with students. So I didn't know that I was going to end up in an advising office, but I was going with my interest and my curiosity. How can I help support students? From there, that's when it was 2020, you see it right there. I applied to be an assistant dean for advising in the College of Arts and Sciences, and that's when I joined Penn. I joke that being at Penn really meant being in my house in Havertown, Pennsylvania, which is where I live. So worked remotely there for a year, got to know my colleagues, got to learn a lot about academic advising, which again, I had started to do at Princeton formally. But before that, I also had done writing tutoring. I had done at Rutgers fellowship advising. So I worked in an advising, in the dean's office, the graduate dean's office, in fact, working with graduate students who were applying for various fellowships. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we look at my sort of CV and my resume side by side. But what I'd like to say right now is that I went through my graduate career just picking up odds and ends that I was interested in. I didn't necessarily have a plan for how those things were going to fit together, but the coherence that I saw was that I learned, having been an undergraduate in, doing writing tutoring, then doing fellowship advising, it kind of over time gained coherence that what I really loved doing was supporting other people in their goals and helping them understand how to frame their writing and their communication to get the things that they wanted. So back to the more recent past, I was an assistant dean here in the college from 2020 to 2023. That was the time during which our previous director of advising retired. And when the job opened up, I just said, you know what, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. Why not? It would be great if we could keep the person who's overseeing the unit be one of us. And so I'm happy to talk about that later during the Q&A, but that was definitely a moment for me where I saw an opportunity. I knew that the previous person who had filled that role was here for a very long time. And so it was very sort of a brave moment where I thought, I've been here a couple years. I feel like I have a lot to bring to the role. I'm going to try because I don't want to know that I didn't try that. So it was definitely a stretch moment, but I absolutely love working with this team. I love the job that I have. And so I just want to encourage you to think broadly and be open-minded about what opportunities you're actually prepared for. All right, so some of the main ideas that I want to share. What's really important when we're thinking about, framing our experience as graduate students is we're being trained in graduate school to become professors or become the next sort of stage of whatever the people who are teaching us are. When we're shifting to administrative roles, it's really important to reframe your experience. So to translate, that's like my comparative literature mind at work, translate what we're doing, make it legible with regard to the job posting. Also focusing on relevant skills with an emphasis on relevant. So it's not really going to be helpful to you or to anyone else to list all of the things that you've ever done. You're going to curate your experiences to address the job ad. I'll talk a little bit about how I gained experience. I touched on that already, so that will also be brief. And then we'll look at some job ads. Okay, so reframing your professional experience. We're thinking about how you have academic and professional experience, especially when we're thinking about, in my case, an academic advising role. So if you're thinking of roles that are doing academic support for students, that's kind of a bucket, is academic and professional experience. So drawing upon your teaching and academic support, rather than listing all of the classes. It's creating a sense of coherence around those experiences so that you're able to say, I have worked with undergraduates in a variety of ways. Maybe I haven't advised, but I have talked to them about their long-term goals, that kind of thing. So it's framing what you have done in relation to what will then be required in the role. I always include a bucket that's called other professional experience. So this is something that I feel like I really want to tell you. You didn't say you wanted this when you were looking for an assistant dean who is helping students with registration and connecting to resources, but I really want to tell you And in my case, that was where I was able to highlight that I had worked in marketing for a beauty company as my first job out of college. And I thought it was important to sort of show, hey, this is the University of Pennsylvania. I know you have all kinds of students, and more broadly, there's concern around the value of the liberal arts. Let me show you how a comparative literature major out of college went to work in business. And actually, that became like a huge part of my interview process. It was as if suddenly someone had finally noticed that I had done that experience. When you're curating your experiences as well, you want to select presentations and publications. Not all of the articles, not all of the blog posts, not all of the conference presentations. Just use a couple. And what you're really doing there is signaling, I can communicate with people. You're not doing the content knowledge that you're doing in a CV for an academic job. Like all of the times I've spoken about Frantz Fanon. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is saying, I have presented in front of a lot of people. I've been invited to talk to people, in classrooms, like I was an invited lecturer in my friend's class, right? Or here's a blog post. So I'm showing the communication piece. And then finally, select grants and awards. We're not doing a whole list. In my case, I wrote about how I had included that I had received a fellowship to finish my dissertation. And that's really what I'm framing for the recipient of that information is I can go ask for money and get it. That's all I'm doing is saying I wanted some money to fund me and I got it. Okay. Research, teaching, and service, that's another bucket. So again, rather than writing all of the classes that I have been a teaching assistant for, and all of the committees I've been on as a grad student and the conferences I organized, these are the topics that I think are really important, again, with respect to an academic advising job. It's actually project management, right? Like I wrote a dissertation, look how I was able to chunk it out. Or I was able to organize a graduate student conference. That meant I recruited people, I wrote the call for papers, etc. I'm not talking about the content. I'm signaling I can take a really big project that is long-term in terms of the planning, and I can chunk it out. I'm sure that that will be relevant for you when thinking about academic planning. As I mentioned before, you're thinking about communication skills across media and audiences. Curricular design, that's actually when you've come up with a syllabus, but that's the framing, that's the terminology that is legible for an administrative role. It's curricular design, presentation skills. And then finally, the sort of summary here would be, how does your service speak to the skills needed in the job? So I'm saying this in various ways, but it's not about the content anymore. It's not that you're an expert in your field and that's what you're trying to do all of these years so that you earn a doctoral degree. It's not about the content and the sort of addition to the conversation, which is extremely important. It's what are the skills, the things that you can use and do, writing, reading closely, understanding people, that you're going to bring into this next experience. Right, so here I'm kind of illustrating for you, and I'm happy to share these slides as well. How do you focus on relevant skills? This is literally what my resume looks like. So core skills, language skills. I'm a comparative literature undergrad and PhD. I know 7 languages to varying degrees. So I wrote them out. This is me signaling, it's actually come quite in handy because my advisees speak these languages. So I'm paired with academic advisees who I can connect with on the basis of language. Even though we're having conversations in English, I can say and I have a number of Polish students actually, because my husband's Polish and I studied some Polish. I can pronounce their name. I can say a couple of words like dzień dobry when I pick them up in the waiting room, and it lights up their eyes to say, oh my gosh, she knows my small language, right? So that's why I'm framing it here. Technical skills. All right, I've worked on blogs. I know how to use all of the Office suite. I had previously to this role already learned how to use FileMaker, this database, when I was a fellowship advisor in grad school. We use FileMaker every day in this job. And it was listed in the job ad. So I was like, hey, I literally know how to do this. I mentioned other databases which signal really, even if we don't use Pivot in the particular fellowship database, I'm signaling that I am adept at using technology, that I'm willing to learn something new. And guess what? A little over 2 years ago, we changed registration systems here. And the people who were here knew that was going to happen. And during my interview, I got lots of questions about how I approach technology. So that was going to be relevant. And of course, all the course management websites and those things. So What is important for you to signal that you know for that role? Great. I want to talk here briefly about an executive summary. So I mentioned earlier that the people who are looking at your cover letter and resume, they are doing the day job that they have, plus the job that they are trying to hire you for. So they're very busy during the day, and it's just they want the best colleague possible. And also they have a family, and also it's the weekend, and they really need your help in framing the information so that they know whether it would make sense to have a longer conversation with you. So the way that I wrote my executive summary, rather than talking about my research interests, which are not in here, I was quantifying the number of years that I had with particular experiences and the types of experiences. So highly trained teacher, academic advisor, researcher with significant administrative experience who's passionate about equity, access, and inclusion, excellent communication and project management skills across multiple languages, and a proven track record of securing external funding. So that's me with my fellowship that I won, right? 10 years of, this is now, it's more than 10 years now, but 10 years of experience in teaching and advising, 10 years of experience developing research plans, etc. Briefly, how do I get those numbers? Own your experience. How many years have you been teaching? How many years have you been working on your dissertation? Those, as long as you can back it up with lines in the resume, you will surprise yourself with how many years you have of various experiences. This is me, even after Princeton. So the years will continue to accumulate, but write down the number so they get a clear sense of who you are. And then, as I note here, this is how I frame my education. It's not listed vertically. That's because I'm trying to have only 2 pages, or in fact, 1 page of a resume. So be creative about formatting as long as it's clear. Okay. Create a coherent narrative. You all, all doctoral students need to learn the art of creating narratives. So this is another opportunity to write in another genre, to say, I have always been interested in working closely with students in my tutoring, in my teaching, and in my advising. Quantify your experience, even if it is just 2 years. It's not really the number that matters, but being honest and making it like a bullet so that it stands out in their mind. And of course, address the job's key terms and activities. So whenever you're able to literally say the word that they wanted you to say or that they're pointing to, use those words. Great. So how did I actually gain experience? This is me sort of signaling to you what were the things I did. So here I was able to note that I had done academic advising at Princeton. So again, you'll see how I'm quantifying how many. I had 12 first-year students, 10 sophomores. What was my job? To provide accurate and timely information. That's what advising is. That's what's in the job ad. So in my case, I'm acknowledging like I actually did have experience for the role. I'll also acknowledge that given where we are in the current climate, we probably want someone with even more experience at this point, but that didn't stop me from applying because you don't know what the applicant pool looks like. So put yourself out there. Just be honest with what you have, but don't sell yourself short because you feel like you don't have enough experience. Great. So this is another snippet from my resume. And again, I'm listing out what I really want to highlight for you is sort of the formatting, which again, this was all in a section about this very specific type of advising experience. But again, put in the numbers. Who did I work with? What was I doing? What were my responsibilities? And you see how short it is? This takes a lot of wordsmithing to get it to that short. I then was able to do subheadings, right? Like I'm not going to be able to list all the things that I did in that experience, but I know that I wanted to highlight communication skills. So I developed workshops and again, project management and administration, which is how was I able to organize tasks, knowing that an administrator's role is to organize various types of tasks. And then here, what I just want to do briefly is do like a side-by-side between like what a CV looks like versus a resume. So this might be more familiar, where you're going in backwards chronological order, which is like, here's my PhD with a certificate in cinema studies. Look at my title. Look at these awesome people. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. This is all they need to know. Okay, good. She has a PhD in a liberal arts area. Okay, she has a master's too. Oh, cool. Look, they're both state schools. That'll be kind of handy because Penn's so big, sometimes it might feel like a state school. But wait, she actually went to an Ivy League institution like ours. That's what if I'm looking at my own materials as if I'm my own hiring manager, that's what I'm looking at here. Okay, large institutions, large complex institutions. Okay, a more peer institution. And of course, the liberal arts degrees. So now I'm going to pull up just 2 job ads if we have time, look at some of the key highlights and sort of talk out some of the things that I think went into the writing of it and some of the things that I would encourage you to point towards. And these are, these bullets are the general pieces that I'm looking for as a hiring manager. Do you have formal experience in academic advising? If you do, I want to know immediately, because this is an academic advising job. So are you ready today? Okay, maybe you don't because you never had the opportunity. You're in graduate school. There's not really we don't hire graduate school students at Penn to advise formally. So you couldn't have gotten that experience in the college or in the School of Arts and Sciences. So do you have informal experience? Have you mentored students in their clubs? Do you have students in your lab who you're sort of mentoring through their project, but then on the side, you're saying, hey, so what are your plans? If you have that, as the hiring manager, I'm like, okay, I get a sense of how they would approach this job that they haven't done. What's your experience working with faculty? It might be the faculty in your own committees. It might be that you're a graduate assistant for another faculty member or research assistant for someone else. Why do I want to know that? Because we interface with faculty all the time. So do you know how to talk to them? Do you know how to negotiate with them? Do you know how to ask things of them? Which is the next piece. Do you understand faculty culture? So those are important just because if you understand where someone else is coming from, then it's easier to recruit them to your cause, right? And then the last 2 are really about being an administrator rather than a scholar. I mean, you should learn these when you are in school and becoming a junior scholar, but you got to make it obvious that you learned these things. So are you able to learn about and activate complex systems and networks across a campus? Like, have you met people across the campus? Are you able to parse the parts of a project and understand who you need buy-in from? And how organized for you? That question came up a bunch in my interviews. And again, in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about all the other interviews that I did for other types of positions, some that I got to the finalist stage, some that I didn't, some that I declined offers, like those kinds of things over several years while I was looking for my next landing spot after Princeton. But in each and every one, as a person with a PhD, every single administrator made a huge deal of, wait, but really, like, are you organized or are you a scholar who likes to do things on their own time? Like, how do you keep your calendar? Do you know this is a 9-to-5 job? I mean, the number of times I was asked that. Now, thankfully, because I'd worked in marketing, I could say my first job was in business. So actually, yes, and I prefer a boundary job. But think about that. What is an administrator's job like? What is their life like as compared to a traditional academic? And how can I signal early on in my materials, I'm ready to make the shift? It won't even be, there may be some challenges, I can signal those, but also I want this. So with that, oops, I'm not ready for your questions, but I'm just going to pop out, and I've got 2 job ads that I wanted to point out. So the first one is for an academic counselor for the Office of Academic Advising at Wake Forest. And I'll just, we'll send these around, but I'll just read, I guess, the first couple of pieces here, and just because I want to make sure that Ian has time to talk as well. And I want to show a separate one, but look at the job description and think about what they're going for. So in this case, this academic counselor plays a vital role in supporting the academic success of students by leveraging knowledge of academic policies and procedures, serves as a consultant and engages with various stakeholders, including faculty, staff, parents, and students, contributes to academic and operational projects in alignment with the objectives of the Office of Academic Advising. This is very similar to what we do in this office. So I'm already going to wonder, all right, have you ever supported a student's academic success? So again, have you mentored them? Have you advised them literally on course selection? Have you advised them because you also were a biology student? And so you want to tell them You know, when I was in your shoes, here's the sequence that I did. Why don't you go talk to the biology department? I mentioned before, understanding faculty culture. We've already stated in the job ad, you will be talking to faculty, staff, and parents. So are there times that you had to talk to somebody's parents? Or how would you even approach it? So this is more about the preparation that you would do if you have a conversation. When we get to the essential functions, provides professional academic advising to undergraduates. We knew that was going to be there. Consults with faculty and staff. Okay, are there times that I did projects as a grad student with other departments? Maybe it was when I was organizing a conference. You know, what are those moments that I had to go out of my comfort zone, talk to someone that I didn't know, and get their buy-in for something? All of these sort of subpoints around meeting with students, this is getting at organization skills. Like, are you communicative? Do you know how to talk to people? And are you responsive? So those might come up. And again, you'll see, I always like to signal sort of the verbs that are being used. So coordinates and participates, receives and investigates. When are times that you have done that in your current roles? Yes, so those are the main pieces. I mean, it's much easier when you have a job ad, but it's that close reading, you know, from a literary perspective that comes in real handy. Answer what they're asking you, because the first piece is just getting to the phone call. What I've submitted get them to call me for 15 minutes? Will they get interested? The second ad, which is a little bit different, is from Cal State University Fullerton, and it's for a college advisor in humanities and social sciences. So already we're like, okay, this is for a specific discipline. We get the, you know, sort of overview. This is really interesting because in this job ad, not only are they talking about advising, but they're talking about the personality of the person that they hope. The ideal candidate in this role should have a positive attitude and an active, energetic mind characterized by highly ethical practices and a commitment to diversity, openness, flexibility, integrity, and kindness. And I think this is really interesting because you don't always, I mean, our job ads in this office typically do have some language around having a good sense of humor. And I'm always drawn to those ads because they're trying to signal to you the office culture and that they see you as a person. And so apart from signaling in your letter your qualifications and how you can translate your experiences from graduate school into the position, they want to know what you're like. They do want to hear a little bit about you. So it might be a very, very brief anecdote about advising and like your academic advisor that you remember or a professor who mentored you. Just a little bit. You know, again, we're trying to keep this not too long, but this is an invitation to show how you would fit in or how you would contribute to the culture they already have. And again, this is, as we see throughout the ad, this is under the supervision of the Director of Humanities and Social Sciences. So there are opportunities here to signal your disciplinary background, to signal like your affinity for this, if you have that, or even the contrast. Like, although I have my backgrounds in biology, this is how I approach working with my colleagues in the humanities and social sciences, and framing it so that they understand how you would approach working with students in those disciplines. So mindful of the time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm very, very happy to answer questions about this. But the main goal is translation is key. So thank you.
Allison, how do you want to pause for questions now, or do you want me to do a quick thing and then open it up?
Maybe you can go ahead and do your piece and then we'll leave questions for the end.
Okay, I will be, I'll keep it short. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Allison, for the invitation. Always glad to, I do part-time advising with Carolyn's team, so always happy to see her. Could you drop in the chat if you're willing, just sort of like your discipline and your status? Like, are you a fourth year PhD? Are you a postdoc? I'd like to get a sense of who's on the call because that might help us answer your questions or give advice. Also, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me at any point tomorrow or 2 years from now or whenever it's relevant. So I work in the Center for Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Innovation. I'm the director of the grad-facing unit. We also work with undergrad TAs. So I do see myself as sort of student services in the sense of being invested in graduate student and postdoc professional development. There are some versions of a center like ours that are also undergrad facing on the learning support side. So for instance, our colleagues at Princeton, the Sheridan Center does both what we do and what Weingarten does at Penn. And so there may be some opportunities that kind of blur the types of roles represented on this call. I want to strongly second everything that Carolyn said about trying to think about how you can align your experiences with the needs of the job that you're applying for, and really getting past that faculty job search mindset where, you know, in our case, for most of the positions we hire for, that doctorate in a discipline represented at Penn is part of what gets you in the door, but ultimately your research is not part of your daily life. Some folks can still remain research active, and that's great for them, but that's not what we're hiring for. So you wouldn't want to lead with your project. You want to lead with, in the case of teaching centers, um, you know, your teaching experience, mentoring experience, which those of you particularly in STEM fields may have. Anything that can speak to the sensibility that you've developed as a graduate student and or as a postdoc of having a broader understanding of the culture of teaching across one or more institutions. So have there been opportunities for you to interact with folks from other fields and make that case that while I'm a good teacher of history, I also have some sense of what's going on beyond my silo. And this can be really challenging. And so for those of you who are still at Penn and are going to be at Penn as a graduate student for a couple of years, come talk to me about opportunities to work with us that would give you some tangible experience that you could leverage in applying for a job, saying, I was a TA trainer. I worked for 2.5 intense days with people from 20 different disciplines. I have some experience in designing a teaching workshop. You don't have to have a ton of experience. And I'm going to second what Carolyn said, you know, without applying for something that seems really senior, don't be deterred by a job ad that says, ideally would have 3 to 5 years of experience already doing the work. That's a desideratum. That's not necessarily going to be what they're going to get in the applicant pool. So go ahead and you know, shoot your shot, make your case, because you never know what they're seeing. But really think about that alignment between how to translate your experiences into what's relevant for the job. Let's see. And so I would say that, you know, like rethinking your cover letter, and that's something that I'm happy to help you with. That's something that Allison and our wonderful colleagues at Career Services do on a full-time basis. But, you know, if you find yourself applying for something that seems adjacent to a teaching center, come talk to me and I would love to help you. I would also say that I have, without saying too much, I have been on, you know, I have applied for some jobs in the not too distant past, so it's not like I'm coasting on 20-year-old experiences here. And I'm currently involved in 2 searches, and so I'm definitely seeing the things that can happen in applications and in interviews. One thing, looking ahead to screening interviews or campus visits in these recruitment processes, is that you'll often be asked to do some sort of authentic task as part of the interview. And I can say more about that in the Q&A. And again, that's the kind of thing where if you found yourself prepping for an interview, screening, or on campus, come talk to me. Happy to help you. Anything I can do to help you get a job. Yes, it's selling your labor under like capitalism, but I want to help you do that. And I would say that even though these are uncertain times right now, as Carolyn alluded to, there are job ads being posted from other institutions, and I've got 2 fresh ones that I can share with you. Before I show you those, I had a consultation with someone today who's looking to take a path that's not being a professor at an R1, and we had a frank conversation about talking to her mentors to get them on board with how to support her for the kind of role she's seeking. And so even if people, you know, typically for jobs like ours, and I think in Carolyn's shop as well, we're not asking for letters of reference up front, but they will be doing a reference check later. So you still want to make sure that your people understand what kind of job you're applying for. Because if I call a reference to ask about one of our positions and all the faculty member can talk about is your research project, that's a real mismatch, and that's going to hurt you. And I don't want you to be disadvantaged. So I earnestly hope that you can get your people to understand the kinds of jobs that you are interested in and are seeking so that they can best support you, which is what you deserve. You need to be supported by your mentors in this process. So let's look at, let me drop a couple of things in the chat. Here's a job. Drexel's Teaching Center actually has 2 positions that they're hiring for. And this is one of them. This is the more junior one. And as advertised earlier in the chat, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Betsy Barre, is hiring at Wake Forest. Before we dig into these, where do you find these job ads? It's not always obvious. If you look on higher ed jobs, which is one good place to start. I'm not, sorry, I haven't been doing much Zooming for a while. I guess this will work. Is that okay? So there's a couple of different places where these jobs can live, and sometimes our jobs get miscategorized, but you could look, sometimes teaching center work might be under faculty affairs if it's faculty facing. Sometimes it could be under curriculum design, and so you might need to do a little bit of poking around. And there is also there's a listserv called Pod, which I can talk to you about offline or one-on-one, which is where a lot of jobs in my corner of academe get posted. But let's look at the CAT job. So here's the job at Wake. So this is an assistant director. You might also have some opportunities to teach, and if you enjoy teaching, that's a nice thing to know. There are also some people in Carolyn's shop who, including Carolyn, who continue to teach. It's about contributing to program consultations, observations, workshops. These are the bread and butter kinds of activities. Let's come down here to the education, looking for a terminal degree with evidence of effective university level teaching. Here is, 2 to 4 years of experience in educational development or equivalent work. And, here's where you might work as a grad fellow in my shop for a year, and that you could leverage for this. And so I would, again, encourage you, don't be deterred by it if it seems like they're asking for a bit more experience than you have. Even as they are saying, we would love to see some example of some previous experience. And here we've got some examples of interest in software knowledge. But again, don't think that you have to tick all those boxes to be credible in applying for this job. And let me just, maybe I won't share. It's a similar thing going on in the Drexel job that I dropped in there, where again, they're looking for a number of years of teaching experience in supporting instructors, either formally or informally. And so here you might be able to carve out a niche for yourself in your program, organizing some things for your peers so that, you could talk about something that you had done as an informal mentor. Let me stop there, I think, so that we have time to talk, if that seems like a good decision on my part. I hope it is, because it's the decision I'm making. So yeah, what questions do y'all have for us?
You can drop your questions in the chat or unmute yourself, whatever is easiest. So we have a question in the chat. In the current political climate that is staunchly anti-DEI, how do you still leverage all of your experience and your own identity in DEI work in a way that will not get ignored by institutions that might shy away from embracing that work right now?
Well, the first thing that I would say, because this is a great question, you want to, well, let me frame it this way. I'm curious about the part of your question, Gianna, regarding institutions that might shy away from embracing that work. I mean, I think that's important because they may not be able to name it anymore, but let's see if there are other hints in the other things that they say on their websites that signal that they do care about these things. And I'll just say this from the advising perspective of our office. We probably never had the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion on our websites at all, because those are newer terms, and they're very specific in their meaning, even though there are DI offices, or had been, to be transparent there. But we know that our advising practice is holistic, and we care to meet students where they are, and we understand that we have a diverse student population. And so if I were to post a job ad, I might not have said DI anyway, regardless of the current climate, but you would be able to get from the rest of the website, the rest of the materials about this office, what is the ethos that we bring. So that, I think, is extremely important. You see a job ad, you try to read between the lines, you understand that there may or may not be language there given certain constraints, but do your homework in terms of, learning about what the culture of a place is, what their values are, how they're championing, in our case, the liberal arts, which are absolutely about diversity of experience and approach. And then in terms of the other part of your question, which is how do you sort of leverage your experience, the facts, as the graduate assistant, and this is my real experience, for the Latino Studies department at Rutgers, because that was the name without any, AO accent, right? It's Latino Studies. I was able to contribute to these types of experiences, such as their 40th anniversary, recording the videos, interviewing alumni, right? So I've said where I've worked, and already as a hiring manager, what I'm going to read between the lines is, okay, first of all, these are real experiences about project management, but also this was an experience that this person had in a particular department with a particular mission towards students regarding a particular culture, right? So I think that the emphasis will always be emphasize the actual skills and experience, but I think equally important is you thinking about where you want to be. Is it a place that you will feel comfortable? Because the language may not signal as clearly, given what we're all facing, what they're doing. So doing that homework on the side is extremely important. Ian, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, a person needs a job. On the other hand, I would hate to coach someone into a position in a institutional circumstance where they felt there was a fundamental misalignment between the values of the unit or the institution and their own values. I'll leave it at that. However, I think you want to take your cues from what you're seeing at the institution, because I've been doing in a couple of different contexts. I've been looking at job ads recently for folks in different fields, and some institutions, some public institutions, are still very much emphasizing their commitment to these things, and credit to them. And so I would say sort of mirror their language back to them, even if in other contexts, you might want to, if it seems like an institution is avoiding certain terminology, then you might want to strategically reapproach your commitments using different language and talking about working with students from a wide range of backgrounds, helping all students succeed, and things that I would like to think that we could continue to agree are desirable. Recognizing that no one on this call, to my knowledge, has much power over what various institutions might do.
We have another question in the chat. How common is it for people working in advising or student-facing roles to have PhDs? Do you have a lot of colleagues with PhDs?
So in the college office, and I can also speak more broadly to other advising offices, having recently attended a conference earlier this academic year for advising. So in our office, all 10 of our assistant deans for advising have PhDs. That is a preferred but not required credential. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't at some point, if it was the right applicant, hire a student with a master's. But for the assistant dean role, PhD has been preferred. We also have another role called assistant directors who work with our students in academic difficulty, and the preferred background there is actually a counseling background. So again, it's about what type of work they're going to be doing. But specifically with PhDs, I will say that part of the value, again, it's not the discipline per se, and it's not the research per se, although the research skills certainly are about project management. The reason I think that the background reason why we are interested in a person with a PhD is because they understand the faculty culture. They understand the culture of a university. They understand the pressures that students will face in this type of a setting. And then they can help the student navigate a university. So yeah, we have quite a number.
I know you didn't ask Shelby, but I would just say that for the most part, at least in our sort of associate director roles, we have traditionally hired PhDs from the disciplines, again, in part for the same reason that Carolyn articulated, and also because there's an expectation that each of us will teach regularly in a program at Penn, although there are some other qualifications where we have some folks with a master's in instructional design and things like that who are also in our shop. I'll pick up Priya's question first and then let Carolyn chime in too. There's sort of a 12-month hiring cycle in this side of the house. It's unpredictable. It's not neatly organized into one sort of hiring conference like things used to be, or sort of fall applications, spring interviews. So jobs could come up at any point. There is a big conference in November, which lets hiring schools talk to people, but it's not mandated. It's not like, you used to have to go to the MLA to interview for jobs, although that culture is kind of blown up. So I think it is good that there may be opportunities at any point across the whole year.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it is in the advising world as well. I mean, one thing to keep, so it's when, you're ideally trying to replace a role. And so of course there's always work to be done with students. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, what I would suggest, thinking about the applicant side, was that when I was teaching at Princeton, I was constantly, had my job alerts on, and I would apply whenever something seemed like a good fit. And also, I was mindful of the teaching calendar that I was currently under, in terms of maybe knowing that I could stay for a number of years. I knew that I was in a 5-year position. In year 2, I already started applying for jobs, knowing that there was going to be a time horizon. And so early on, I was able to cast a wide net and be a bit selective in terms of like, well, I have my teaching job. I could stay here for 4 more years. Let me try my hand and see what happens, and learn about the place, or, okay, that didn't work out. But I did maybe early on consider my own teaching schedule, which was like, I am currently teaching students. And so I knew that if I were offered a job, I would not be able to, or feel comfortable, quitting mid-semester. That would not be a responsible thing to do for my students. So I did think about, a job search can take several, even in one position, can take several months. They open the position, you apply, the people on the receiving end are going to spend a month or two, depending on the applicant pool. If they're just, we're not getting what we want, they may spend 2 months collecting materials, and then it may speed up, right? Like now we're doing the phone interviews, but who's around literally in this office to do the phone interviews? Okay, now we're in month 3. And now we have our finalists, but when can they come in? So it can take several months. So I would just suggest, applying whenever you see something that works. And then the tail end, which is accepting an offer and negotiating your current position or teaching schedule, or, the responsibilities that you may have to leave behind, can be part of the conversation with the person who's receiving you. I can't start until X, because I'm finishing a semester. But guess what? They would have known, because it's on your CV. You said you're teaching. You said you're, in the middle of this awesome project that you need to close off. So just remember, we're human too. And if we really think that you're the best fit for the position, we're going to work with you on an appropriate start date.
Yeah, and just to echo what Carolyn was saying, at our session on Monday where we were talking to an HR rep, she said that the average time from submitting an application to receiving an offer at Penn at least is 90 days. So it takes several months to sort of go through that process. So I think that's important to factor in as you're sort of figuring out your job search timeline. And as Carolyn was saying as well, start dates are often negotiable. I know I negotiated my own start date because I wanted a little bit of a buffer in between leaving my last position and starting my new one. So, there's always some, room for negotiation there. We got another question. How common is it for international PhD students who need visa sponsorship to get a job in student services?
I actually don't have an answer to that. I wonder, Allison, if Ian, you have an answer.
This is something that's being discussed on this pod listserv today. A number of people are talking about, because there's I would say, broadly speaking, the faculty staff divide here is pretty profound, and that the culture of being able for the institution to support someone in getting a visa is heavily weighted towards tenure track faculty positions, and particularly at large universities, and that there doesn't tend to be that support on the staff side. That's not written in stone, but it is something where the hiring committee would have to have been sort of thinking about keeping that possibility open, as I understand it, because the job ad has to be written in a certain way to meet these requirements. And so but I know that there's not a simple yes or no answer from Penn's HR about whether a staff position could be something that would work for someone who does need a work permit. But it's not sort of what folks are typically thinking about, I think is a fair thing to say. And I don't mean that to be discouraging, Anna Ruth.
Yeah, and what was shared from HR at our session on Monday was that, if you're talking about H-1B visa sponsorship, that's reserved for positions that require specialized skills and knowledge. And so, to echo what Ian was saying, it sort of comes down to whether your skills and knowledge are required for a position or just kind of advantageous for the position in terms of whether that would qualify for, visa sponsorship. I know it's not impossible. It has happened. Certainly at other institutions, I've met other career advisors who were international and were able to get visa sponsorship. I do think it can be a little bit tricky, so it kind of depends on the particular institution and the position.
Can I come back to something that Carolyn alluded to, just because it came up in one of our recent interviews where we were interviewing someone who is currently in a faculty role, and when we asked them what interests you in our role, they first led with what they liked about being faculty, which is not unrelated, but like it's a huge shift because faculty are effectively unmanaged, and on the staff side you are managed. Sometimes you are emphatically managed, and that is a big change for someone. And I think it's a big change depending on the environment you've done your PhD in. A humanities PhD, it's kind of you and your thoughts and the tears of the blank screen. It's a little different if you're in a lab. But thinking about how you would, thinking about motivations, why you think this kind of, and Carolyn spoke about this earlier, why you think this kind of work environment is actually going to be conducive to your happiness and your skills. And I want you thinking about that, not only so that you can make a good case for yourself, but so that you can ideally find a job in academia that is conducive to your happiness. I don't want to sound sappy, but that is what I want for all of us. you know, and being honest with yourself about what are the parts of the academic life that bring you happiness, and what are the parts that you could happily walk away from. And that's not always an easy reflection to do.
No, I think that's great. I love that you brought that, because I don't mind if I'm sappy, because that's all my dissertation work is about interrelation and being human. And so absolutely, what is, again, on the one hand, you need a job now, soon, fine. But keep in mind that that's what you're doing, is like getting a job, like as opposed to building a career. That's, I just don't want to deny that people need to, sustain themselves, but what is going to be possible in this job for you? So in my case, I knew that I didn't want to be a tenure track professor. Having seen my professors live the life they had. I love teaching though, and Ian mentioned I do teach. I teach a first-year seminar here at Penn, and I knew that I was going to be able to do that from the job ad, from the conversations I was having, that it was going to be encouraged that I do that. So that was a draw. I have since still been able to do presentations on Frantz Fanon. I actually just have, it's not next to me right now, but I have out, I'm a co-editor of a collection of essays that just came out from Bloomsbury Academic that took, yes, thanks, Ian. It took 4 years to do, because it was during, snippets of time that were not my workday. but I also wasn't working into the night. So that's a whole other conversation I'm happy to have about how I managed to do this in a way that felt comfortable for me. So think about what are the things you're willing to put away, and how can this type of job that you're looking for still act like I talk to incredibly smart people every day. I talk to faculty, I can go to their presentations. They understand that I have research interests, I can teach, and also I have structure. I like having structure. I like not having to work on only one project. I like the variety of tasks. And so that's something to think about too. If you make it to any type of interview, including the phone screening, what does your typical day look like? Because that will help you understand if there's time for you to continue on the projects that you're interested in, or that maybe you are seeking a different type of variety than what you have now, and you're willing to take the structure of a day, given that you're gaining this variety of tasks.